If you've been lifting long enough, you've more than likely dealt with an injury or pain that's affected your training or taken you out of the gym completely. And if you're like most lifters, you've probably made at least one, if not all three of these mistakes that are keeping you injured, making your recovery time take longer, and just limiting your overall return to your previous level of performance. Every single day, we work with lifters who've made these exact mistakes, so we're going to not only show you what they are so that you can avoid them, but also what you should be doing instead. The first mistake is following a program that has one of these three characteristics. It has very rigid percentage-based loading parameters, such as you have to perform 3 sets of 5 back squat at 85% of your 1 rep max. You're always trying to do more weight or more reps week after week, no matter what. You're always pushing yourself to 100% of your capabilities every single session. The issue with training like this is that your ability to perform in the gym is going to fluctuate day to day and week to week based upon a number of different things, such as your sleep quality and quantity, your nutrition, your overall work stress, and other various life stressors. Following a very strict percentage-based loading structure or trying to do more every single session does not take this into account. When you train like this, you're much more likely to deal with an injury or take a longer time recovering from an injury because the amount of training stress they're placing on your body is more than what you're currently capable of handling. When you couple this with the fact that most training-related injuries are chronic overuse type injuries, this is definitely not the way that you want to be training if your goal is to remain injury-free or simply recover from an injury that you're currently dealing with. Instead, what you need to do is include some form of auto-regulation into your training. Auto-regulation is a fancy way of saying adjusting your training intensity based upon how you're feeling and your readiness on that day. What this does is it allows you to make good progress from your training without the risk of overdosing your training or underdosing your training, and therefore increase your injury risk because you're doing too much, or staying stagnant and not making progress because you're doing too little. The good news is that there are a few ways that you can incorporate auto-regulation into your training. The first is to use percentage ranges instead of very specific percentages to determine how much weight you should be lifting. For instance, if your program would usually call for a set of 3 reps at 85% of your 1 rep max, you could switch it to 3 reps at 80 to 90% of your 1 rep max. This would allow you to go towards the lower end of that range if you're not feeling great that day, or you could stay in the middle of the range if you're feeling kind of average that day, or you could go to the upper end of the range if you're feeling great that day. The second way to incorporate auto-regulation into your training is to utilize RPE as a way to determine how much weight you should be lifting. RPE stands for Rating of Perceived Exertion. It is a scale from 1 to 10 that grades how hard an effort was. A 10 out of 10 on the scale is a completely maximal effort in which you couldn't have lifted more weight for that given number of reps, or done more reps with that given amount of weight. The most common RPE scale that we use in lifting is based upon reps in reserve. This is the number of reps that you could have done after completion of the set if you had to take that set absolutely to failure. For example, if you do a set of 10 reps with a weight that you could have done for 14 reps, that means that you have 4 reps left in reserve. When calculating RPE for this example, you would simply take the number of reps in reserve and subtract that from 10. So in this specific case, you would do 10 minus 4 reps in reserve, which gives you an RPE of 6. Therefore, an RPE of 6 means that you had 4 reps in reserve, an RPE of 7 means you have 3 reps in reserve, an RPE of 8 means you have 2 reps in reserve, and so on. It's important to note that using RPE during your training is a skill that takes time and effort and practice to improve upon, and is also much more accurate with sets that have fewer reps and that are taken closer to failure. So don't be discouraged if you have a hard time utilizing RPE in your training at first, because you will definitely get much better at this the more you practice. The second big mistake that lifters make that either keep them injured or delay their recovery process is relying on passive treatment strategies. Passive modalities or passive treatments are things that are done to your body without much active participation from you. This includes things like e-stim, foam rolling, cupping, massage, and so on. While these things absolutely feel great while you're doing them, they don't really provide any long-term changes and therefore aren't the long-term solution to your injury. Most of these passive treatments will give you temporary relief from pain and improvements in flexibility, but it's important to note that these typically happen on a time frame from minutes to hours. When you rely on these types of treatments to feel better from your pain or injury, you are at risk of falling into a very common vicious cycle that we see with a lot of injured lifters. What happens in the cycle is you are dealing with pain or limitation from your injury, so you do one or more of these past type of treatments, and then you therefore temporarily feel a little bit better and can make it through your training session. However, because you haven't made any long-term perfect changes, You end up hurting again and you're back at square one, and then the cycle continues from there. Instead, what you need to do is focus on much more active treatment strategies. This is going to include things such as modifying parts of your training program that make your pain or injury flare up, addressing any issues with sleep, nutrition, or life stress that may be playing a part in your injury, and doing active rehab work to improve the physical strength, endurance, flexibility, etc. of the injured body. The last and probably most common mistake that we see injured lifters make is working with rehab providers who do not understand their goals nor their style of training. When you do this, one of two things is likely to happen. First is they'll simply tell you to stop training. When this happens, you'll either listen to them and stop training for a while and therefore run the risk of becoming detrained, or you're just going to ignore them and continue doing the training that you're doing before that might have led to you becoming injured because you hadn't received any actual guidance on how to modify your training. The second thing that often happens in this situation is they'll have you do a lot of rehab work that's just too easy for you, like doing banded shoulder rotations with a resistance that you could do for dozens or hundreds of reps without any difficulty. The issue with this is that doing really easy rehab work like that will probably end up with you feeling better because you're not really stressing that injured body part, but it doesn't prepare you to actually get back into the gym and lift heavy. And when this happens, it's much harder to return to your prior level of performance, and your risk of re-injury is so much higher. Instead, you need to search out and try to work with healthcare providers who do actually understand your goals and your style of training. If you do this, they'll be able to come up with an appropriate and effective rehab plan for you, as well as help you expertly modify your program so that you can stay training at the highest level possible throughout the rehab process. This will help you recover quicker, more completely, and more safely get you back to the type of training that you love. If you found this to be helpful, please help an injured friend out by sharing this with them, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more future injury and training content just like this.